MTSS is, or you practice RTI. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about leadership. Now, all of us, it's really important that we recognize our people skills and our business skills, but there's a couple of different leadership styles, and all of it comes down to the balance of our concern for people and their feelings and their buy-in, and then our commitment to actually making significant changes in the work. You know, it's going down the elevator. And I'm gonna give you a little anecdote, and it's gonna help you to see where you are on the spectrum, because you're either gonna lean more towards people concern, or you're gonna lean more towards task concern. And wherever you lean will show you what your greatest weakness might be in this work. So there's some people who are really, really concerned with getting everybody on board. You know, relationships are important. You don't want people to be upset. So when you have ideas for big changes and people start to push back, you would be likely, or more likely, to pull back and say, people just aren't ready to do this yet. Okay, this isn't a good thing for people. It's not a good thing for culture. And if you trend too far that way, it ends up being kind of like a country club atmosphere where everyone's really happy, but nothing is changing. Now the alternative is like, there are things about this system that need changing. We must change them. We're gonna make these happen, whether you're on board or not. And you're going like, you're tending towards a more kind of authoritarian place, which could end up where everyone is kind of like, we're gonna comply, and maybe things are changing on paper, but you don't have the buy-in. And what we're trying to do is to balance our task concern and our people concern. So I'm going to tell you something that we went through in Groton Dunstable, and your reaction to that story in like the pit of your gut is going to be an indication of where you lean. To create change in system, you're going to need to reallocate resources. None of us are going to get any more money. So it's all about like taking the money that you have and then putting it to good use for your students. And so we ended up having an external auditor come out to Groton Dunstable to tell us where we could find some cost savings. And what they recommended was, first, that we look to outsource our custodial and our cafeteria staff. Next, to make our bus routes longer, because if you don't have 100% ridership on all your buses, you could technically make the routes longer to get more kids and drop some buses. And then the other big thing was closing down our central office and moving all administrators into schools so we could get rid of that building. And so one of the things that we explored was, the first thing that we did was we looked to outsource the custodial staff. We had colleagues on the custodial staff that had been in the district for 25 and 30 years, who knew every kid's name in the school, you know, who did an amazing, amazing job. And we were talking about, we're gonna have to do this because then we can save money on the benefits. Because we're not required to provide benefits, we would hire a contractor. And so when this whole thing went down, and we say, you know, through this change, you can save hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to make sure that you have interventionists and to make sure you have high quality curriculum. There's gonna be a feeling you have in the pit of your stomach, and that's either, that's terrible, like it's so terrible to do that to people who are hardworking, amazing colleagues. The other part of your gut is like, I wonder if we could find cost savings somewhere because there's things that we need for kids. So check in with each other for 1 minute. Do you tend to lean more towards like, I feel bad for the people, or like, I wish we could do something? And that will help you to see where your heart and your gut lean, even if you're pretty close to the middle. Okay, so 1 minute to check in with each other, go.
Because I feel like but I would, where I would delivering a message but also in addition, how much we're all part of it. Yeah, I do. Well, at least I don't like having this conversation online model. I don't like
Okay. So what we have to understand about ourselves, Urban this morning talked about understanding your leadership style, is when you recognize that these big changes are going to need to happen. As I introduce you to the blueprint and you understand the enormous scope of this work, you start to go, oh my gosh, eventually we're going to have to look at a new schedule, we might need new high quality curriculum, we need to change our professional development, we need more time to look at data. You can imagine that all of this is not going to go over super well with everybody. And like in my own practice, I try like so hard to make people feel heard and to make people feel like they're a part of decisions that I run the risk of not getting things changed. Because when I say, this is the best thing for kids, unequivocally, the evidence is there, I know this is the best thing for kids, and then everyone starts to push back, I start second guessing myself. And we can't do this is too much work, and I'm like, oh, maybe it is a lot of work, maybe we don't have to go there right away. And the reality is we do have to go there right away. And so all of us have to really focus on how do we really focus on people and create a team where we're pushing, where we're being warm demanders. That we're saying the system has to change for kids, but we somehow also have to get our team along with us. And again, my greatest weakness will be not getting it done. But if you're a task person, your greatest weakness will be alienating everybody in the process. And so it's just understanding where your own Achilles heel is and making sure that on your team you're partnering with people that are really, really great at the thing that you might not be that great at. So as we talk about making changes in leadership, what I want to introduce you to is just this analogy that helps me to understand so much more about MTSS. And I relate MTSS kind of like going to the dentist. So take 30 seconds and tell someone next to you, how do you feel about the dentist? Ready, go.
I know. I don't really Are your kids seeing it? No. Former co-worker, she retired a few years ago. They call her grandma. They love her. So she's coming over to stand. They want to be They got the dog. I'm like, you stay with them. I was like, no, rather than I was going to get I'll get grandma. And they're old. Do your parents live around here? No, my parents live back in Rhode Island. Everybody's in Rhode Island. Very much so.
Okay. So let me tell you about the dentist. And I'm going to talk to the dentist as if the dentist were an RTI system. So in 2004, the U.S. Department of Education started focusing on this concept of, responding to intervention. Being proactive, being really focused on data. And so, when we go back in the Zoom, RTI was that cute little triangle, which we have transformed into a cute little schoolhouse. And in that triangle, there were 3 tiers. Tier 1 was for all students. Tier 2 was for some students. And Tier 3 were for a few students. And then somebody went rogue and created a triangle that on the bottom said 85%, 15%, 5%. Do you remember that? What that meant was, the goal is to get all students in Tier 1, okay? We want all students in the least restrictive environment available to them. And on any special education continuum of services, that's gonna be a general education classroom. So that's the goal. Maybe you're not there yet, but the goal is to try to make Tier 1 ready for all students. So all students have access to a core curriculum and grade level learning. And then you're gonna have some students who are gonna need more. So all that triangle was saying, if you go back into the original research and the original RTI for Success network, it said all students will be in tier 1. And then you're probably gonna have about 15% who will likely need more, to close the gap. And people translated that wrong. They said, okay, so we're looking for about 85% of our kids to be in tier 1. And that was never the intent of RTI. Okay, RTI was written to supplement, not supplant. So those are really, really important words there. Talk at your tables for a second. You can look it up, you can guess, 30 seconds. What is the difference between supplementing tiered support and supplanting tiered support? Check in with each other for 30 seconds. Go, I will admire you talking.
Well, it's actually, I wish I had gone to the last day because what's happening for that in some of the classes, kids are not all
Okay. So these words are critically important. They still exist in every federal grant we write today, that you must offer supplemental support. So now here's where the dentist comes in. I promise I'm gonna bring it home. Okay, these sweet little lovey pies, okay, they're adorable. We want them to be tier 1 dentist patients. Okay, as we want all of these sweet children to be tier 1 dentist patients, right? Now we recognize that all of them have some very different needs and some of them might need some targeted support. But the dentist is actually a great, great example of what RTI was supposed to be. And that is that all students deserve access to general dentistry for some proactive care, right? So we give them toothbrushes, there's a little fluoride rinse, we talk about how to floss, but very early on, the dentist is not gonna wait until your teeth are cracked and falling out to repair them, right? The dentist is a great universal screener every time you go. What's the universal screener the dentist uses? The x-ray, perfect. So the dentist does an x-ray, and then the dentist looks at the data and says, I still want to make sure that this kid has access to general dentistry. I still want to brush the teeth, I still want to do the fluoride, I still want to give them the free toothbrush, but data indicates that a couple of these kids are going to need more than what I'm offering to everybody. Okay? So I want to provide that in addition to what I'm offering. So when we look at the universal screener, this sweet little thing here, look at that beautiful smile, she has like a bunch of really small little holes in her teeth that we know are going to be pretty serious cavities. So we want to be really proactive about, we should put some fillings on those. And this guy here, he also has some cavities, but then his teeth are crazy out of alignment too, and he's likely going to need braces. And so what we say is we want to make sure these kids get what they need when they need it based on data, but they also go to the dentist. So she is going to need those cavities filled. Who fills the cavities? The dentist. So one of the parts about MTSS that's really crucial is tier 2 does not have to be another person and it does not have to be another place. Because sometimes we see kiddos struggle and then we come down to he needs to go somewhere else. She needs someone to push him. Okay, a general education classroom teacher can provide tiered support for students. By having a workshop model, by pulling a small group, by making sure that you're differentiating instruction. And in the session this afternoon, I'll talk about what's the difference between UDL and differentiated instruction. But this is all about, I want to be responsive to data. So she is going to get tier 1 dentistry. There's a universal screener that tells me she needs targeted support. I'm going to give it to her. Okay? Now, he also is going to have some targeted support by the dentist. But his data indicates he has like a much more severe issue on that data, and so he needs an orthodontist. Supplement, not supplant means that he gets the orthodontist in addition to getting the dentist. Okay? What we often do in schools is we say, we have tier 1, oops, sorry, these are a little silly. We have tier 1, and this is like the checkup and the cleaning, and this is being really responsive to our district curriculum accommodation plan, which talks about what are you going to do when kids are struggling, how do you proactively avoid that, and then you're going to get your cavities filled, and then you get braces. And what we often do is we supplant the orthodontist. So like, hey, you need braces, you're never going to see a dentist until those come off. Okay, and that's kind of being fresh, but how often do we say, the data shows me that you need Wilson reading? You're going to get Wilson reading during the 3rd grade ELA class. you're supplanting Tier 1 instruction with Tier 2 instruction. And the idea would be that you have to get both. You get your grade level curriculum, you get your tiered intervention in small group, but then you also get things that are on the grid. And you also get tiered intervention if you need it. And so then we have some kids who, like if you look at this sweet child here with the cleft palate, when he comes in to the dentist knows that child is going to need Tier 3 support. He's not a Tier 3 kid. Okay, because even a kiddo with a cleft palate, he might need an oral surgeon. He can also go to the orthodontist, because the bottom right is a kiddo who has a cleft palate and braces, and he still deserves to go to the dentist. So when we look at the eval and we say, you are teaching all students, we mean general education teachers are teaching all students in the least restrictive environment available to them. And when we do that really, really well, we can get very close to all students. And so what I want you to grapple with right now is in your own district, in your own school, is there a system that allows everybody to get this? Because that's what RTI was all about, and RTI failed to yield gap closing measures. And it wasn't that it wasn't a brilliant idea, because clearly you have a kiddo who's struggling in reading and is also a language learner. You want them to have general education classroom, you want them to have a reading specialist, you want them to have an English language learner teacher, you want them to have all of those things, right? But sometimes you say, but we can't provide all those things. The system doesn't allow us to provide all those things because, and we're gonna fill in the blank. So we're gonna play a little game right now and you're gonna see how much you already know about MTSS. RTI is that building in the middle. And what it says is, if we want all students to be in a Tier 1 classroom together, we have to eliminate the restrictions and the barriers that are there academically, behaviorally, and socially, emotionally. Okay, and we're gonna do that through universal design, and so all kids actually have equitable access to general education classrooms. Okay, but in order to do that, there's things in the system that have to be there. So right now, I want you to take, the concept of the dentist in the kiddo who needs all of these different services. And in many cases, they're probably getting supplanted. The child is losing access to grade level expectations, which is the core foundation of MTSS. And I will give you one reason why currently all your students are not educated together, and then you're gonna come up with the other reasons. Okay, one thing you say is, we don't have a schedule for that. There's literally no time in the day for a kid to get something extra. We have to pull the kiddo out of something, and I'm not gonna pull a kid with a reading disability out of math, because they're successful in math. I don't want them to lose this. So if they lose English, it's not a big deal, because it's kind of like a switch. Okay, so one reason why RTI can't be supplemental and not supplanting is because of a lack of a schedule that allows for it. Come up at your table with 3 more reasons why kids can't get all 3 tiers of support if they need them. Ready, go.
So we do better. So we do better if we had a period that was for that schedule. Actually, that would resolve the DOJ concern about things.
I think also the continued work to have teachers certified for those areas.
Only for,
but it still has to be a separate service, right?
For high, for 4 and 5.
So for 4 and 5.
In the ELA class. So this actually has more restrictions.
but what if everybody for special
So the reasons that you come up with, which I guarantee you've come up with all of them, right? What we're gonna call those things, or what we do call those things in implementation science, are the drivers. What we're trying to do is we're trying to create a system where all students are educated in a general education classroom and have equal access to grade level rigor, high expectations. Some students are going to need additional layers of support. And of course, we have to put students in the least restrictive environment, and sometimes that tier 1 is not the least restrictive environment. But what we have to recognize is that we can alter it so that it is. So this is like the goal for all of us, is every kid equal opportunity to grade level rigor, high expectations, in a classroom that meets their needs academically, behaviorally, and socially, emotionally. But a lot of times we can't do that because of the schedule is one thing. What's another reason? We don't have enough staff to do it. What's another reason? We don't have the capacity to do it. People don't know how to meet the needs of diverse students. Okay, we could literally go all day and I promise you would guess them all. But what those things called are drivers. And so MTSS, the way that it transforms RTI, is it actually envelopes RTI and says, if it is to be successful, if your tiered interventions are to be successful, you first have to create a system where all kids can be equally educated in tier 1. And that will require 3 baskets of initiatives, drivers. The first is the competency drivers, and that's all about how we train teachers to meet the needs of all students. What do you have for professional development, instructional coaching, professional learning communities, instructional rounds, educator evaluation? Okay? Because if you don't have drivers to build people's capacity to meet the needs of all students, this will always be too restrictive, and you're gonna supplant. The next basket is these are leadership drivers. Resource allocation. You know, you have to make hard decisions and move money. It's about your hiring and onboarding. Who are you putting in buildings? There's a huge aspect of mindset and shared responsibility. Does everyone believe they're responsible for teaching all kids? Okay, so leaders have to focus on those things. It's all about creating leadership teams, distributed leadership with teachers, making sure families and communities are a part of this work. And then you have the more nitty-gritty implementation drivers, which are, do you have a schedule for this? Do you have a high-quality curriculum that is flexible enough to meet the needs of all students? Do all students have access to grade level rigor? Do you have universal screening tools? And if you do you have time for teachers to look at the data and make instructional decisions so that we can supplement and not supplant? So all of the things that are barriers to our system is what MTSS is all about. Okay, we're saying if we believe that all students can learn at high levels, if that we create an environment that like sees them and values them and supports them and challenges them, if we believe that, then we have to figure out what are the barriers that prevent that, and we have to eliminate them. And that's what MTSS is about, is the sum of the barriers that prevent that are the schedule, the staffing, the professional development, and so that's where this gets really complicated. So I want you to check in for a moment and just think about this concept of what MTSS is acknowledging the barriers in your system that are preventing all kids from being educated together in high quality classrooms that truly meet their needs academically, behaviorally, and socially emotionally. And if you do that really, really well, you can begin to build a system where you're not trying to intervention your way out of weak tier 1. Because that's what we've been trying to do for too long and it's not working. Okay, so check in at that definition. How does that analogy sit with you? Just 30 seconds with a partner. Okay, what is MTSS and how is your understanding of it changing with this dental analogy? Go. Okay. So this whole system is really built on the premise that we can create a tier 1 classroom that meets the needs of all students. Okay, that's what this is built on. So let's talk a little bit about what prevents that. And this is an analogy I use all the time. It's really quick and dirty, but it's thinking about when we plan a lesson, if we value all of our students, okay, we want everyone to have equal access to tier 1, then we have to recognize that we have to stop doing things in one-size-fits-all ways. Because oftentimes, tier 1 is done in a one-size-fits-all way, which then creates kind of this snowball effect of saying, well, the kid can't be successful there, so we have to pull him out. We gotta put him in a lower level. We have to put her in a reading class, because that is too restrictive, okay? And I'm gonna talk about why it's too restrictive, and over time, through professional development, through scheduling, through leadership, you change your mindset about what the job of a general education teacher is. And so I want you to imagine that you're having a dinner party. Well, you're having a dinner party for me. I'm asking you to have a dinner party for me. I'm gonna be 40 next week, so it's gonna be a real bash. You're gonna throw me a 40th birthday, and I'm bringing 30 of my closest friends to your house for a party, right? And I say, you have 2 goals. Okay, these goals are like state standards, in that everyone who comes to my party is gonna enjoy the meal, and they're all gonna leave full. So this isn't like they enjoy one bite of something, is that everyone can fill a plate and have a meal. And what I know you're not gonna do in this scenario is you're not gonna say, you know what, I make a really mean casserole. Like, all of her guests are gonna love my tuna noodle casserole, right? No one's gonna say that. What do you wanna know right away when I tell you I'm bringing 30 people over and you have to make it so all of them can eat? What are your questions? Right? You wanna know what my friends eat, but that is not universal design. You don't need to know what my friends eat. You need to know what are the barriers that prevent some people from eating. Okay? So you start to say, oh gosh, some of her friends might be vegan, some of them might have some sort of allergy. And what you recognize here is that it's not my guests who are problematic. Okay, if my guests can't eat, the problem is really that the casserole is not appropriate. It's too restrictive. And so a lot of the times when we say the students will not be successful in general education, it's often because there are too many restrictions in general education, okay? And so what we have to do is we try to create a system that removes those barriers. So I want you to think about a general education class right now in your school or district that you would say, I can't put all students in there. I can't. It's too restrictive for some students to be successful. Talk about what are 1 or 2 reasons why that classroom is too restrictive. Think about grading procedures. Think about the assignment load. Think about the pace, right? All of that is in our power and privilege to alter if we are universally designing, if we know how to do that. So again, check in really quickly with each other. What is making your tier 1 classrooms too restrictive to equally distribute students in those classes? Go.
Hopkins is different because they switch for every class. I'd say it's more of a challenge if you're first grade class and you have third grade.
Okay. So let's again talk about the goal. The goal is never the casserole. And we serve a lot of casseroles. Okay? And again, this whole system is based on supplementing, not supplanting. So the goal, the number 1 goal of an MTSS system is how do we create a really robust, strong, comprehensive tier 1 as the foundation of our system. And then recognizing that some kids will need more than that. How do we offer that to them in addition to what they're getting and not instead of? And so what we know is that this casserole is just not gonna work. Okay, it will not allow everyone to meet the goal. So I always do this. You're going to put up your hands. You're going to look around. Some of you have heard this analogy before. But raise your hand if I said you have to meet the goal of enjoying this meal and eating a full plate. How many of you could meet those goals with a tuna noodle casserole? Raise your hand. Look around. This is very insulting. I make a really good tuna noodle casserole, and now I'm feeling insulted. So what I can do is I can say, well, then you can't come to my party, because I flipping make really good tuna noodle. And so if you can't enjoy it, then you need to go somewhere else. Okay, now again, I'm being really fresh here, but the reality is when we do that, when we create a casserole, we try to intervention our way out. And we say, well, you can't eat the casserole, but I'll make you something else. And sometimes I'll make you something else becomes very supplanting. Like, you can't do that class, so I'll put you in this small group. Okay? You can't be successful here, so we're going to start a behavior program. Okay? And we do this all the time. And that makes us short order cooks, where we have so many different programs for so many different kids, because we're trying to intervention our way out of tier 1 that doesn't meet the needs of students. And we do not close the gap if all kids don't have equal access to grade level rigor. Okay? That is the #1 foundation of an MTSS system. So what we want to do instead is we want to recognize that there is more than one way to meet these goals. Okay, in the Common Core Standards, it actually says you can universally design these standards. And what that means is providing options and choices, built-in proactive accommodations that allow all students to be successful. So how many of you, if I said, you know what, I'm not going to put together a buffet, I'm not going to put together a casserole, I'm going to make like kind of a buffet. I'm gonna do like a pasta bar. There's gluten-free pasta, there's some lettuce, you can throw some meat on salad, I'll have a couple different sauces. Okay, now again, raise your hand if you could eat the tuna noodle. Oh, this is just so depressing. Raise your hand if you could eat off a pasta bar that included salad and gluten-free pasta. Same thing in classrooms. Okay, the same thing is true in classrooms. And so when you think about recognizing barriers, when we say, a 9th grade class must independently read a hard copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, it will be just as problematic as serving a tuna noodle casserole. Because I can predict there might be some kids who can't decode at that level yet. There might be some kids who are English language learners and they don't know English yet. There might be some kids who have fine motor skills and they can't turn the pages of a book. There might be some kids who have some sort of visual disability and the text is too small. And so, if you can't be in my English class because I am handing out hard copies of novels, I am making a choice to exclude students. The restrictions are put in by me. But when I can anticipate a barrier, and I say, some of my students might not be able to decode this text, and it's like a rigorous text and I want them to have exposure to it, I'm going to demand that they interact with this text. But I can eliminate the barrier of decoding by offering what option on the buffet? An audiobook. Like sometimes we're talking about if a child is not successful in a gen ed classroom because they need an audiobook, because they need a calculator, graphic organizers, exemplars, more time, small group intervention, working with peers, all of those things have to become a part of a tier 1 classroom. And that's why we focus on all of these different initiatives to say, I can get any student in my class to analyze how complex characters develop. What that really means is we are all a product of the world and what happens to us. That is what that means. So where are these characters going? Who are they interacting with? How does that change them? Because people are complex. And I can get you to understand that by saying, if you want to read the book, you can either listen to it, you can read it in a small group, you can come over here with me, we're just going to read a selection of that, okay? But we have to really think about grade level standards. There is no standard to read To Kill a Mockingbird in hard copy from front to back. The standard is every kid in your room understands how complex characters change because of plot development. And any teacher who really thinks about how to do that, they have the competency and the skills to do it, they have the mindset to do it, and then we also have a schedule that allows the student to also learn how to decode. But here's the reality, and I say this all the time. If a child comes into 9th grade, reading at a 2nd or 3rd grade level, in Groton Dunstable we right now have 19 kids in high school freshman year who are reading below the 4th grade level, okay? We have a fully inclusive freshman English class. It's open honors, there are no levels. Okay? Kids are proportionally scheduled into 9th grade classes together. There is not a small group pullout. Okay? This is an English class that meets the needs of all students. Okay? Those kids are not going to learn to read today. I have no anointing oil to make the child a reader today. And a lot of the times we hear, but the kids have to read. I absolutely agree. And the kid does need Wilson, and the kid does need a literacy lab. But I have to have a schedule that allows the child to get both. Because if you don't get to be in a classroom talking about, really important themes like discrimination and thinking about literary works and letting them choose, another book that they want to read to talk about how their complex characters react, you will not close that gap. And so we have to start recognizing the barriers in classrooms are alterable and the barriers in our system are alterable. And that is really what MTSS is all about, is we have to stop running our system in a casserole-like static way. This is the way we do things, let's follow along. The system was designed for this mythical average student. And a mythical average student becomes really dangerous. So those of you who can eat the tuna noodle casserole, you provide me with a false narrative that what I'm doing is effective. Because it works for you. But if we have to teach all students, it doesn't work anymore. And so that's why we talk about looking at curriculum. Because again, our teachers are drowning right now in Tier 2. We're trying to intervention our way out of weak Tier 1, and so everybody feels reactive. We're looking at individual students. We're turning them into numbers. We're basically trying to work. We're drowning in hot kitchens and like burning our hands on pans. And there's another way. Because if Tier 1 is buffet-like, if we're proactive, if we think about what our environment, what about our culture is preventing all kids from being educated together, then we can start planning for that. And we remove those barriers by providing other options, and then we're going to be reacting much less. Okay, right now you're probably over-identifying kids who need intervention because of weak Tier 1 practices. And the answer to that in MTSS is figure out in your system what is preventing strong Tier 1 practices, and then put those into place. And this work will take years. And that's okay. But again, you have to start going down the elevator. You've got to start changing mindsets. Understanding that this is not going to be a country club. That people will grieve the loss of practices they feel are effective, but are not based in any real evidence. And so we have to understand and go through that grieving with them, but to say, we are not stopping. This work is too important. And so there's a couple of different tools that we have that will help you start this work. There's an MTSS mobilization guide, and in it, it will talk about giving you a framework of where you are in your MTSS journey. There's also a diagnostic quiz that you can look at. There's the blueprint. Okay, there's all of these different things. We also have these modules. So let's say that you're I don't know if we have the competency and the capacity yet in our district to really push this professional development. Okay, there's tools for that. So there's 10 different or 20 different videos on what is UDL, what is MTSS. There's also videos on access and equity. So you can check out some of these videos, and they're designed of 3 minutes of video, discussion questions, resources for staff to explore. But this helps to answer the why are we doing this? Because again, what we say now is, this is working. Everyone loves my tuna noodle. And it's because you only invite people to your party that are not picky and do not have dietary restrictions. And that is not what a public school stands for. And so what I want to give you for the rest of this time is to really explore the blueprint now that you understand kind of where's the design? The design is built around that visual. So when you go through the blueprint, what you're gonna see is a section on every part of this visual. And it will talk about that the goal of this work, I'm going crazy with the buttons. The goal of this work is a strong Tier 1, every kid. We also acknowledge that tiered targeted support is completely necessary. Absolutely for some kids, that's the equity perspective, but not if it's taking them out of what is rightfully theirs. And then it will go into the drivers, in which drivers you need to put in place, and you can go through a self-assessment to say which ones do you already have. And then the rest of the day and tomorrow, there's breakout sessions specifically based on those things. So my colleague Mike Woodlock tomorrow is doing a session on how do you create a schedule where there's a block of time. We call it a win block, what I need, where students will get the supplemental support. Okay? If you're wondering about, well, what does this assessment strategy look like? What about the screening do I need to know about? There's another session on like looking at assessment in math, looking at assessment in ELA. How do you take good x-rays? It will tell you who actually needs cavities, and who just needs a little fluoride. Because there's a continuum of support there. So take the last 15 minutes of this session. You can either go to those websites, because that website has every tool that you could want. It's MA Tools for Schools. You can not look at those right now, but just have a conversation about when you're looking at that MTSS visual or unpacking it through the blueprint. What are the strengths? What do you have in place? And what are you going to have in a strategic plan? And there's also, we have about 50 hard copies of the blueprint over here, so there's not enough for everyone. But if you don't have a device with you, or if it's better for you to, if you want to highlight, if you want to annotate, there are a couple of copies up on that table if you want to grab some. And I will be available to answer questions, but take this time by yourself with your team to think about what about this system do you already have, and what are the barriers that you know that you need to attack. Now that you know kind of the purpose, the why. The story is every kid in grade level curriculum, in the least restrictive environment. And so how do we make that environment less restrictive so all kids can flourish? So this is your time. Call me over if you need me.